It wouldn't be like that. I'm not suggesting we become strippers or anything, but it would get the ladies in for a nice meal with some scenery. Lee pulled away from Dirk's arms. You don't have to like my idea, but you don't have to be bitchy about it either, Lee continued, moving away. He began getting out of the bed. I don't hear you coming up with any ideas. Lee stood up and began stomping around the room, gathering up his clothes. Maybe his idea wasn't the best, but Dirk didn't need to be an asshole about it. Lee pulled on his underwear and then his pants before shoving his arms in his shirt. I'm sorry, Dirk said from behind him, and Lee stilled when he felt him touch his back. Lee could count on one hand the number of times he'd heard Dirk say those words. I shouldn't have sniped at you. Dirk slipped his arms around his waist. I don't think it's a good idea, though, and I don't want you to be hurt when others don't either. Dirk rested his head against Lee's shoulder. I should have been nicer about the way I said it, because you're right. I haven't come up with any ideas either. Dirk began to trace small, slow circles on his stomach. Are you hungry? Lee nodded slowly, not trusting his voice right now. He couldn't believe how much Dirk's words had hurt, and he really didn't want Dirk to know. He'd liked his idea and thought it was a good one. Sure, not everyone would be up for it, but he bet enough of the guys would be willing to do it if there was the chance it could help save the station from closing. He knew that if they wanted to raise the money, they needed to take some risks. Lee sighed softly as he waited for Dirk to pull on his pants. He didn't talk as he followed Dirk to the kitchen. Lee settled in one of the chairs as Dirk put sandwich fixings on the table. Lee made his sandwich and took a bite, not really tasting it. He knew he shouldn't have been so sensitive, but he was still angry at Dirk and wasn't ready to forgive him yet, even if he was giving Lee that lost puppy look. Dirk's hand took his, and Lee looked up from his plate as Dirk squeezed his fingers lightly. Maybe Dirk was right, and his idea wasn't so great. Lee took another bite of his sandwich before getting up for something to drink. There's beer in the door, Dirk said, and Lee got two before returning to the table. He handed one to Dirk and sat back down. Dirk looked a bit lost and stared back at him. Lee could see the hardness in his eyes and knew Dirk wasn't going to back down. In his mind, he'd apologized, which Lee knew had been hard for him, and in Dirk's mind, that should be the end of it. But for Lee, it still hurt. Normally, he wasn't a sensitive person. He was strong and put himself on the line every day for strangers because of his job, one that he loved. Over the past 6 months or so, he and Dirk had steadily gotten closer. Dirk had even gotten so he actually talked about things. Most of the time, anyway. But sometimes, he could still be the most insensitive person on the face of the earth. You know, you can still be such an asshole, Lee said, meeting Dirk's eyes. You don't have to agree with what I say, but you don't need to ridicule it either. Dirk looked a bit contrite, and Lee figured that was the most he was going to get. Okay, I'll try. Dirk finished his sandwich, continuing to hold Lee's hand. Lee finished eating and debated whether he should just go home. As Lee placed his dishes in the sink, Dirk pressed his chest to Lee's back, holding him around the waist. Come back up to bed. I really am sorry, and I'll show you if you let me. Lee let Dirk guide him back toward the bedroom. Chapter 3. Almost everyone from all the shifts filled the living and dining areas of the fire station. We need ideas, Captain Morris was saying. We've received contributions about expanding the chicken dinners, and we're looking into those, but at most they'll bring in $1,000. What we need is an expansion of our fundraising, and we need it fast. Lee sat quietly, staring at the others around him. Over the past few days, he'd become convinced that Dirk was right, and his idea wasn't any good. He hadn't come up with any more, so he sat and waited for the others. Lee was ready and willing to help with anything he could. There has to be something, Captain Carter prompted. If we thought it would help, we'd sell chocolate bars. How about a station open house? One of the men Lee didn't know offered. Forget it, he followed up with. If there was a fire or a call, we'd be sunk. A few others offered suggestions, but none of them seemed to pan out. At this rate, we may as well give it up and let them close us down, Captain Morris sniped as he looked around the room. Lee, you're always full of ideas. You have to have something. Lee shrugged and looked at Dirk, who shook his head slightly. Don't let Kraus speak for you. What have you got? Lee nearly shook his head, but figured he might as well take a chance. They hadn't come up with anything, and his idea wasn't any worse than any of the others. Well, first thing, I think we need to hit the local merchants harder for donations to lower food costs. We've tried that a few times with mixed results, Captain Morris answered. I know, so this time we go in teams of 2, and we wear our uniforms. Let them see who they're saying no to, Lee suggested. I bet we get a lot more donations. If we want to keep the station open, we need to flex a little muscle, so to speak. We'll give it a try, Steve, who was in charge of the chicken dinner sales, said from off to the side. I'll need volunteers, he added, and a few men held up their hands. Anything else, Lee? Captain Morris prompted. Yeah, Lee said without looking at Dirk, because he could almost feel him scowling beside him. In addition to flexing our muscles to get donations, I think we need to flex them in other ways, too. I think we should add something entirely new to our chicken dinner evenings. Think of it as sort of a ladies' night. Lee paused for a second to get his thoughts straight, and then stood up. He felt out of place, but with so many people here, it was easier to talk. We tried to get one of the halls for an evening and sell tickets for the dinner. We tried that and it didn't really work. Most people want to get their food and go home. That's why we put up a tent for those who want to stay, and mostly serve in to-go containers, the captain explained. That's where the ladies' night comes in. Like I said, we rent one of the halls and do a served dinner with us as the servers, Lee said, and a rumble went through the room, but quickly quieted. The mood seemed positive, with guys looking at each other and nodding. The thing is that if we really want to pack the place, I figure we have to goose it. So my idea is that as we're serving, we wear just our fire pants, boots, and hats. My thought was to bill it as a chicken and beef cake dinner. We charge more than for the standard takeout dinner. Lee gave up as the voices in the room began to rise around him. Looking around, Lee expected to hear angry voices, but he really didn't. Instead, he heard things like, I need to go on a diet, and saw a few of the guys flexing slightly. Are you serious? Captain Carter asked, and Lee nodded, figuring he might as well go for broke. We could find a photographer who could take pictures. Say, $10 for a portrait with your favorite hunky fireman? That would bring in extra money, and I bet we wouldn't interfere with our regular sales because we'd be appealing to a different audience, Lee explained, feeling more confident when he saw the other faces around the room. I know it's probably a bit risque, but like you said, Captain, if we don't take a chance, we won't raise the money. Lee sat back down as people around the room talked over one another. Most of them seemed interested in the idea, if nothing else. Lee sat back with a pleased smile on his face and turned to glance at Dirk. He glared back at him, eyes narrowed. I thought you weren't going to bring that up, Dirk whispered in a harsh tone. I wasn't, but no one else had any ideas, and look, they seemed to like it. Lee nearly beamed as he turned his glance to the rest of the room. Almost everyone seemed excited. So I take it you want to pursue this? The captain asked, and most heads in the room nodded. He began doling out tasks to people so they could see if what Lee proposed was feasible. Lee could hardly believe that the rest of the station seemed to like his idea. Lee, I'm going to ask you to get volunteers willing to act as servers, the captain said, and Lee nodded. We assume you'll be one. Lee grinned and turned to Dirk, but his chair was empty. Other guys made their way over, particularly the younger, single ones, eager to impress the ladies. I can also try to line up the photographer, Lee volunteered, and the captain nodded with a bit of a smile. Then Lee looked around the room to see where Dirk had gone, but he was nowhere to be seen, and the other guys were crowding around Lee to ask questions. I think it's a great idea, Vanessa, one of the female firefighters, told him, and Lee smiled. If we can pull this off, I'll get the rest of the women to help with ticket sales. She seemed tickled, and Lee put her down to help. Captain Morris whistled, and everyone paused where they were.
Just to make this official, let's have a show of hands for those who want to give Lee's idea a try.
Most of the hands in the room went up. A few didn't, and Lee knew that if Dirk was anywhere nearby, he was probably voting in the negative.
Okay, then we have a lot of planning to get done in 5 weeks. Lee will act as overall coordinator, so talk to him. He's gonna need plenty of help.
The energy in the room was amazing. People were excited about something for the first time since they'd heard about the possible closure. Lee made notes about who was willing to volunteer for what, and after the meeting broke up, he sat at the table, making a list of everything he could think of that would need to get done. They had to find a hall, sell tickets, arrange for the food, do promotion, get tables, chairs, and dishes, and all the other things to make the dinner seem special. He added centerpieces to the list.
You're going to need music,
Vanessa said from over his shoulder.
Also, the photographer is going to need space and a place to work. And I'd suggest a screen with a projector so you can run a slideshow of the station over the years. There are tons of pictures at the Historical Society, and I bet we could get them to let us make copies.
Vanessa took the chair next to his.
I'd also like to see what you can put together in terms of entertainment, and definitely find a place with a bar.
Lee sighed, becoming anxious that he hadn't seen Dirk around for a while. There's a lot to do, Lee said as he looked at the list, which kept getting longer by the second.
Yes, but you got plenty of help, and whatever you do,
she leaned closer,
ask for it. Don't try to do everything yourself. We're all in this together, and we as a group will determine if it's a success.
She nodded for emphasis, and Lee smiled.
What's got you worried?
Dirk hates the idea, Lee said, glancing around one more time. Vanessa scoffed, and then laughed out loud.
He's the most pig-headed man I've ever known. Great firefighter, but as stubborn as a mule. He'll come around, and if he doesn't, there are plenty of fish in the firefighting sea, if you know what I mean.
Lee narrowed his eyebrows and shook his head in confusion.
You don't think you and Dirk are the only guys at the station who prefer hoses to plugs, do you?
As much as he tried not to, Lee couldn't help laughing along with her.
I have to go, but call if you need anything.
She patted him on the shoulder as she stood up.
By the way, I'm looking forward to seeing you serve dinner,
she added with a wink before walking away. Lee continued working for a while on his list before wandering away to see where Dirk was. Unlike Lee, Dirk was on his shift, so he couldn't have gotten very far, and Lee found him in the engine garage.
Where did you go?
Lee asked as he approached.
I needed some air,
Dirk said huffily without looking up.
Find some?
Lee retorted quickly, and Dirk threw down the rag he'd been using on the fire engine running board.
Until you came down, yeah.
Dirk huffed barely above his breath.
I can't believe you brought up that idea. What? No one came up with...